Physical silver is getting harder to find in Singapore. Silver dealers are scrambling to secure stock as prices surge to record highs, with wait lists stretching months and investors rushing into the white metal.
This announcement should not have landed this quietly. It dropped this week. Almost nobody reacted. But what it unlocks creates a problem that doesn't stay contained. So here's what actually happened. No hype, no exaggeration. One of the largest manufacturers on the planet made a battery-related announcement that barely made a noise outside a few industry circles. No countdown, no dramatic stage presentation, no viral clips. Just a quiet release, slipped into the news cycle like it wasn't a big deal. And that alone should make you pause. This isn't a startup. This isn't a lab experiment from a company that's still trying to prove itself. This is the world's largest electric vehicle manufacturer, a company that already produces millions of vehicles a year, runs its own factories, controls massive chunks of its own production process, and doesn't need attention to survive. When they speak softly, it's usually because the decision has already been made. The headlines that did appear focused on the usual stuff: range numbers, charging time, battery lifespan, the kinds of stats that always get attention because they're easy to compare. Longer range than before, faster charging than before, better durability than before. On paper, it looked like just another step forward in the EV race. And that's exactly how most outlets treated it. Another incremental upgrade. Another battery announcement in a space that's already crowded with promises and prototypes. If you've followed electric vehicles for any length of time, you've seen this movie before. Big claims, bold timelines, then delays, scaling problems, or quiet cancellations a few years later. That history makes people numb. When you've heard breakthrough 100 times, the word stops meaning anything. But this one felt different, not because of what they promised, but because of how they said it. The tone wasn't speculative. There was no language about potential or future possibilities. It read like a company outlining something that was already moving forward, not something they were hoping to figure out. And that's the part that should have raised eyebrows, because the specs weren't the interesting part. Here's how battery stories usually get told. Someone announces a new cell. The conversation immediately goes to range, charging speed and cost, maybe safety if there's time. Those are the metrics people understand, so that's where the coverage stays. What rarely gets discussed is how those numbers are achieved, not in detail, not in a way that matters. Buried inside technical disclosures and engineering notes are decisions that don't make headlines but completely change the math. Small design choices, structural changes, manufacturing tweaks that look minor on the surface but ripple outward when you try to scale them.
Does any of this, Sarat, in that big brain of yours, does any of this sound like, smell like, look like panic buying?
No, I would say if you look at the rest of the market, if we would be much higher, yes. Then
That's what happened here. There was a detail in the documentation that didn't get airtime. It wasn't highlighted in press summaries. It wasn't debated on social media. Most analysts skip past it entirely because it didn't fit neatly into a comparison chart. And that's understandable. It didn't sound exciting. It wasn't framed as a feature. It was just there. A design choice mentioned almost in passing, but that one choice explains why this announcement matters far more than the headlines suggest. This is where things stop being about performance and start being about feasibility, about what happens when you don't build one battery, or 1,000, or even a pilot line. But when you plan to roll something like this out at scale, across millions of units, inside an industry that already runs on tight margins and long lead times. Analysts glossed over it because it doesn't show up in a spec sheet. Consumers won't notice it on a test drive. But manufacturers, suppliers, anyone responsible for making sure production actually happens on time, they notice. And once you see that overlooked detail, the story stops being about cars. When most people hear a battery announcement like this, their instinct is to mentally shelve it. Another research update, another lab result, something that might matter someday, years from now, assuming everything goes right and nothing gets delayed. That reflex makes sense. The EV space is full of concepts that never leave the prototype stage. Big claims, impressive slides, then silence. So people hear new battery and assume it's more of the same. But that assumption doesn't work here. This wasn't framed like an experiment. There was no talk of early-stage testing or proof of concept. No language about limited trials or exploratory programs. Instead, the focus was on reliability, stress testing, performance across extreme conditions, long-duration use. These aren't the kinds of tests you run to see if something might work. They're the kinds of tests you run when you expect it to work, and you need to know how it fails before customers ever see it. The timelines matter just as much as the testing. They weren't vague. They weren't pushed out to some distant future where no one remembers the promise. But they also weren't dressed up to generate hype. No flashy countdowns, no dramatic deadlines. Just enough specificity to signal intent. That's not accidental. This company has a habit of announcing things late, not because they're cautious, but because they wait until the hard decisions are already made. Supply planning, tooling, manufacturing alignment. Those steps don't happen in press releases. They happen quietly, long before anyone is supposed to get excited. And this is where people miss the difference between prototype hype and procurement timing. Prototype hype is loud by design. It's meant to attract attention, investors, headlines. It thrives on uncertainty. Procurement timing is the opposite. It's quiet, it's boring, it's when contracts are being discussed, factories are being prepared, and reversing course starts getting expensive. This announcement landed firmly in that second category, which is exactly why it's easy to underestimate. Scaling changes everything. A design that works in a lab can fall apart when you try to manufacture it by the million. Materials behave differently, costs stack up, supply constraints surface. That's why most breakthroughs never scale. But when a design is presented with scale already assumed, the burden shifts. The rest of the system has to adapt to it. This company doesn't build niche vehicles. They don't do limited runs for headlines. When they commit to something, it's with the assumption that millions of units will follow. That mindset turns every technical choice into a structural one. And here's the part that really matters: the timing. If this announcement had come years earlier, it would have been easy to dismiss it as premature. If it came years later, the consequences would already be locked in. But happening now, in the middle of an industry-wide transition, it creates a problem no one has priced in yet. Because scaling this creates a problem no one's priced in. This is the moment where the story quietly shifts. Up to now, everything fits into familiar territory: performance, timelines, scale. But buried inside the technical documentation is a design choice that doesn't make headlines and doesn't get spelled out in press summaries. It's not positioned as an advantage. It's not marketed. It's just there. Almost easy to miss.
Announced. Prices briefly surged past $91, while gold climbed to just below record highs. Now here's why this is big. This is not a routine commodity rally. It is being driven by a rare mix of monetary uncertainty, geopolitical risk, and real stress in physical supply of the metal. Let's break it down for you.
The battery design relies heavily on silver, not in external wiring, not in supporting electronics, but inside the cell itself. Not trace amounts, not surface-level usage, structural usage. And that's all you're told. There's no follow-up explanation, no emphasis, no suggestion that this matters. It's stated the same way you'd mention any other component. Then the document moves on, which makes it feel normal, routine, unremarkable. Silver has been part of technology for decades. It's familiar. It shows up everywhere, in small amounts, doing its job quietly. So when people see it referenced here, it doesn't trigger alarm bells. It doesn't sound risky. It doesn't sound disruptive. That's why this detail slipped through. There's no warning label attached to it, no note about trade-offs, no hint that this choice might change how the system behaves at scale. Just a simple acknowledgement that this material plays a central role in how the battery functions. And then the discussion continues as if nothing changed. But once you notice that line, the entire story reframes itself, not emotionally, mechanically. This stops being just a performance upgrade It becomes a constraint story, not because silver is rare in some abstract dramatic sense, not because it's expensive, but because something has crossed an invisible threshold, moving from marginal use to foundational use inside a product designed for massive scale. And that shift creates a bottleneck most people don't see coming. To understand why that bottleneck matters, you have to look at where silver already sits in the global economy. Silver isn't waiting around for a new use case. It's already deeply embedded in modern infrastructure. Solar panels rely on it for conductivity. Electronics use it in contacts, switches, and circuit boards. Power grids, data centers, communication equipment, all of it quietly depends on silver doing what it does best. That existing demand isn't optional, it's functional. And unlike some materials, silver doesn't have easy stand-ins. You can reduce usage at the margins. You can redesign components to be more efficient. But when a material is chosen for specific physical properties, conductivity, stability, performance under stress, substitution usually comes with trade-offs. Lower efficiency, shorter lifespan, more heat, more failure points. In this case, higher efficiency doesn't mean less silver. It actually requires silver to be placed more precisely and more structurally. The performance gains don't come from removing it. They come from using it differently and more intentionally. Recycling doesn't solve this either. Most silver today is locked into products with long lifespans. Solar panels last for decades. Electronics are dispersed in tiny amounts across billions of devices. Recovering that silver is slow, expensive, and limited by design. It doesn't respond quickly to new demand. Mining doesn't move fast either. Silver production is largely a byproduct of other metals. That means supply doesn't ramp just because silver demand increases. New mines take years to permit, build, and operate. Even then, output changes are gradual. All of this creates rigidity, not scarcity in a dramatic sense, but inflexibility. The system doesn't bend easily when demand shifts. So when a new, large-scale application starts pulling on the same material pool, it doesn't announce itself with shortages overnight. It shows up as pressure, longer lead times, tighter availability, quiet competition between industries that all assume they'll get what they need. And that's before you even consider what happens when this isn't just one company. Now zoom this out globally. This is where the math finally catches up with the story. Up until now, everything has felt abstract. Design choices, scale, timing. But once you start translating this battery architecture into physical requirements, the picture sharpens fast. In this design, silver isn't sprinkled in grams across auxiliary systems. It's embedded at the cell level. When you step back and look at a full electric vehicle battery pack built this way, you're no longer talking about marginal usage. You're talking about a meaningful quantity of silver per vehicle, enough that you can't round it down, enough that it matters at scale. Now ask the obvious question, what happens if only one manufacturer scales this? Even if BYD were the only company to adopt this design, the numbers add up quickly. They don't build concept cars. They build millions of vehicles a year. A design choice that looks manageable at 1,000 units becomes something else entirely at 1 million. Multiply that again when production expands globally, across multiple factories, year after year. That alone would reshape demand. But this story doesn't stop with one company, because batteries don't exist in isolation. Automakers watch each other closely. If one company demonstrates clear advantages in range, charging speed, safety, and lifespan, competitors don't get the luxury of ignoring it. They either respond or they fall behind. And responding means adopting similar architectures, similar materials, similar constraints. That's how technology diffusion works in this industry. Solid-state battery timelines across the sector are already converging. Multiple manufacturers are targeting the late 2000s for deployment. Some will move faster, some slower, but the direction is set. And once a material proves essential to making that leap work reliably, it becomes part of the baseline, not an experiment. This is why the demand that emerges here isn't speculative. Speculative demand is optional. It's driven by expectations, narratives, or price momentum. Industrial demand isn't. If a battery requires a certain material to function as designed, that material gets purchased regardless of price movements in the short term. It's a cost of doing business. And in this case, silver represents a small fraction of the total cost of a vehicle, even when used at these levels. That makes the demand relatively price insensitive. Manufacturers don't redesign an entire battery architecture to save a small percentage on materials. They absorb it, which is where the structural problem emerges. The silver market isn't balanced today, it's already running deficits. Supply growth is slow, recycling is limited, mining responds over years, not months. When a new demand stream shows up that's both large and inflexible, it doesn't get smoothed out by normal market mechanisms. Instead, above-ground inventories start doing the work. Those inventories exist to bridge gaps, to smooth timing mismatches between supply and demand, but they're finite. And once they start getting drawn down consistently, they don't replenish easily. Each year of deficit compounds the next. At that point, the market loses its buffer. When there's no excess inventory to absorb shocks, price becomes the only release valve left. Not because anyone wants it to, not because of speculation, but because it's the only mechanism that can force demand to adjust when supply can't. And demand doesn't adjust evenly. Essential uses hold, marginal uses get squeezed. That's how commodity markets clear under pressure. What makes us uncomfortable is how quiet it all is. There's no single announcement that says, demand just changed forever. It happens through procurement contracts, through factory planning, through decisions that don't show up on price charts until later. By the time the effects are visible, the commitments are already locked in. And this isn't isolated to one company. There's one more layer that turns this from a supply issue into something much heavier. Because silver supply isn't just about how much exists. It's about who controls the part of the process that actually makes it usable. A large share of the world's silver doesn't become industrial-grade metal until it passes through a relatively small number of refining hubs. That concentration matters. It means supply isn't evenly accessible, even if ore exists somewhere else. The choke point isn't always mined. It's the step in between. Now layer export controls on top of that. When governments start treating materials as strategic, availability stops being purely market-driven. Licenses matter. Priority buyers matter. Domestic demand gets served first. Foreign buyers wait, or they pay more, or they don't get access at all. That's not a theory, that's policy. This is why supply isn't just tight, it's gated. Industrial buyers understand this instinctively. They don't wait for prices to spike before acting. They move early, quietly, and in bulk. They lock in contracts, they secure optionality, they build buffers because downtime costs more than overpaying for inputs. Investors behave differently. They look for confirmation, they wait for price signals, they assume liquidity until it disappears. Markets by design are reactive. They price what's visible, what's already happened. They struggle with slow-moving constraints that only show up once commitments are made behind closed doors. By the time shortages become obvious in public data, the metal is already spoken for. The contracts are signed, the inventory is allocated. That's why this doesn't replicate smoothly. It is late, and when it does, it doesn't ask permission. The timing here is what most people get wrong. Large manufacturers don't buy critical materials the way consumers buy products. They don't wait for demand to appear, then react. They plan years. Procurement cycles are long, deliberate, and front-loaded. Decisions made today are about production 2, 3, even 4 years out. That means the real demand signal shows up long before vehicles roll off assembly lines. It shows up when supply agreements are negotiated, when volumes are reserved, when pricing is locked in, when companies quietly start building stockpiles to protect themselves from disruptions they don't want to explain later. This behavior never makes headlines, but it's exactly how price discovery begins. When enough large buyers decide they need certainty more than flexibility, material gets pulled forward. Inventory that would have served future demand gets consumed early. That tightens the market before end users ever see the product. Waiting for confirmation from sales data is backward. By the time demand is visible in deliveries or revenue, the underlying inputs have already been absorbed. The market has already adjusted, sometimes violently. This is why price leads production, not the other way around. The uncomfortable truth is that the window to react closes before the story feels obvious. Once it feels obvious, the easy part is already gone. And that's what makes this moment so awkward. Everything that forces repricing is happening quietly, upstream, away from public attention. Right now. That quiet announcement at the start, this is why it mattered. And BYD isn't the only one moving in this direction. If this helps you see it clearer, stay close. Most people won't see it until it's obvious.